Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 18 of Opening Basics. We're continuing our look at the e4, e5 openings. Now previously, after e5, we looked at the three different ways that white has of attacking the e-pawn, which is, after all, sitting up here undefended. And those are knight f3, f4, the king's gambit, and d4, the center game, which also can lead to the Danish gambit. So of these, I'm finished with f4 and d4. We're going to talk about knight f3 some more later. There's many lines that continue after knight f3, and I've only looked at a couple of them. I've only looked at the Italian game and the Ruy Lopez previously in the Chess Basics series, so there's more to say about that move. But first I want to look at the two other replies that white has here. The bishop's opening, bring the bishop out to c4, I'm going to look at in the next video, and in this video I'm looking at knight c3, the Vienna game. So these two moves have something in common. Basically, one of the ideas of both of these moves is to try and introduce the king's gambit under better circumstances. So trying to get into a favorable version of the king's gambit. So look for the opportunity to play f4 in these positions. So the most common response from black, I'm going to look at the main line first here, knight f6. And this move counters white's influence on the center squares, d5 and e4, and also prepares to castle in a way. The kingside castling can be very handy in these positions where your opponent is going for a quick attack on the f-file, because when you castle, it brings the rook over to defend the f7 square. It's a very handy thing. So this is really a dual-purpose move, this knight f3, and kind of the most logical in the circumstance. And now white can continue with knight f3 here. That would transpose into the four knights game, which I'm not going to talk about. I'll be covering that in a later video. You can play bishop c4. I'll get back to that one. But let's look at f4, which is one of the main ideas of the Vienna game. Now, a very common move for black here is d6, and you'll see this in practice a lot if you play the Vienna game, but it's not really the best move. What it's doing actually is playing into black's plans, playing into white's plans. What you've done is you've transposed into a version of the king's gambit declined, where your bishop is locked behind the pawn wall. So if white just continues normal development, the game might go like this, the typical kind of position, pinning the knight, unpinning and defending the knight, and then d3. And this is a kind of setup that white is really going for in the Vienna game. He's got two pawns in the center. He's prepared to take back on f4 if it ever gets taken. He's ready to castle and get an attack going on the f-file. And notice that white can always open up the f-file by taking on e5. So he's prepared to open that file at any time. He's just waiting for the appropriate moment. And on the other hand, black's position is somewhat cramped. This bishop is going to take, the dark squared bishop is going to take a couple moves to get developed. It's not like black is really losing in this position, but it is just the kind of open position that the white player is going for with the Vienna game. So black was just a little too compliant and giving that opening edge to his opponent. So if we back up, after the move knight to c3, knight f6, and f4, the most common response here is not d6, but rather d5, and the best response too, I should say. Not only the most common, but the main line. So when you play d5, you're opening up a line for your bishop, so you don't have to worry about this guy getting trapped. You're counterattacking in the center, and you're giving up your own e-pawn. But it turns out to just be a trade. White will typically take the pawn. I mean, this is something the white player wants to do. He wants to take and force you to move your knight. But your knight can move and capture a pawn at the same time. And it may look a little bit awkward here, but it turns out to be very difficult to trap. For one reason, for one thing, you always have the idea of just taking the knight on c3 if it ever gets uncomfortable for the knight there. So you do have to be careful. So if this knight disappears and you don't have a target to escape to, you might want to worry about how you're going to get this knight back into play at some point, or how you get it to safety if white chases it with d3. But there's no problem with the immediate d3. So white just continues developing normally. Knight f3, supporting the pawn. Say bishop e7, developing the other kingside piece, so black is ready to castle. And now the two moves here, either d4, shoring up the center, or queen e2, putting pressure on the e-file. And the play could continue from there. Will continue from there, certainly. It's a kind of position, there's maybe a slight edge to black with best play, but let's see. Let's put on a few more moves. It's still a good game for white as well. It's just that white has sort of given up his opening advantage, which is why you don't see this so much in top-level play. So here, the bishop and the knight are starting to put pressure on black's knight, and might actually be a good time to cash out and take the knight on c3. But you see, white still has the typical themes of the Vienna game. He's going to be able to castle, get a rook on the f-file, and this pawn here is going to exert a cramping influence on black's position, make it difficult for him to ever move the f-pawn. So this pawn is kind of a fixed target, and you can try and develop an attack against it, and you can chase this knight away. So white still has ideas, but black with the best play is at least equal and maybe slightly better. So an okay way to play for both sides, and leads to interesting play. I mean, the other thing you have going for you, if you're white and you choose to play the Vienna game, then you're going to have more familiarity with this type of position than your opponent. So even if he knows the opening up to this point, you may still have the advantage of being on more familiar ground. So that is the main line of the Vienna game. But let's look at a couple interesting variations along the way. So after knight c3, knight f6, the main line, and instead of playing f4, white can also play bishop to c4. And this allows the center fork trick, something as either side. You know, when you're playing these bishop to c4 type of moves, you always have to watch out for the center fork trick, and that is knight takes here, knight takes, and pawn there, hitting the two pieces, and black gets his piece back, and with a good position. So this is actually good for black. But when you play bishop to c4 here, you're not playing it with the idea of just recapturing here if black goes for the center fork trick. No, you have something else up your sleeve, which is the move queen to h5. And this line here is known as the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So somewhat of an extravagant name, but you'll see that white is making constant threats in this line. And black is playing somewhat riskily too. So knight to d6, defending the pawn is one of the few playable moves. And then, okay, if white wants to bail out here, white can just take the pawn, and that's okay for white, actually. But the more common move here is bishop to b3, keeping up the pressure. And now, let's see, knight to c6, defending the pawn. Black could continue to not defend the pawn just by playing bishop e7, and that may be a safer way to play bishop e7 and castling, and not going in for these complications. But knight to c6, somewhat greedily holding on to the extra pawn. It is an important center pawn after all. Why not hold on to it? And now white has the funny move, knight to b5, putting the knight on a square where it can just be taken. But of course, if knight takes knight, then we have queen takes f7, checkmate. So this is just trying to distract the knight away from his duty of defending f7. So a pretty funny sequence. And now black thinks maybe he can win that knight by kicking the queen, but the queen can drop back to f3 and still threaten mate. And now the move is either f5 or knight f5. Let's erase this arrow. The moves for black at this point are f5 or knight f5. And anyway, play continues from there, but that's the idea, is that white is constantly making mating threats. And this position is good for white, but it actually, the problem traces itself to this greedy move, knight c6, trying to hold on to the pawn. That was a bit too much for black, and so white should do well in this position. So that's the famous Frankenstein-Dracula variation. So in this position, really, knight takes e4 is not particularly good. White, with best play, gets a slightly better position. So rather than taking there right away, just develop another piece. And then, let's see, d3 can be played. After d3, this pawn is shored up, and there's no longer the center fork trick. And are there other ideas here? Knight f3 can be played here. And after knight f3, now knight takes e4 is a playable move because of the center fork trick. So that's just something to keep an eye on. Now there's no longer any queen h5 with the knight in the way. So this works out okay for black. Okay, so just a few of the wrinkles in that bishop c4 line. There's actually another line here that white has, which is just to play with g3. So we're still in the main line after knight c3, knight f6. So g3 is a sideline at this point. You can play g3 with the idea of developing quietly. You put the bishop here, you put the knight here, castle, play f4 then, after you've kind of slowly set up the kind of position you want. So you're not gambiting a pawn, but you're going for some kind of slow build-up. It's nothing the black player really needs to be afraid of. He has plenty of time to react to those ideas. So let's back up one move here then. Instead of playing knight f6, black can also play the move knight to c6. And this is interesting, particularly for, I guess, historical reasons, you might say. This is can lead to the Steinitz Gambit. So let's take a look at that. Once again, knight f3 would go with would turn into 4 knights game. So bishop c4 could be played here. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But f4 is the main move, and or one of the main ideas, I should say. And in this position, now before, when black put his rook on c, when black put his knight on f6, and white played f4, the move was d5, counterattacking the center, because the knight here was attacking the e-pawn. But now this knight is not here, so d4 is not a knight, not d5. d5 is not a move here. And in fact, the move for black in this position is to take the pawn. So it really makes a difference which knight you bring out. If you bring out the knight over here on c6, you can't get in that move d5. So you have to take the pawn. We don't have to, but it's best to go ahead and take the pawn now. And now the Steinitz Gambit goes d4. Not minding this check. This is the funny thing about it. Yeah, white plays this, black plays this check, and now there's no good move. You can't block because of just taking. Let's see, yeah, f takes g3 is, and there's a pin. I'll just show that. Take here, and you can't take back because the queen is going to grab the rook, and there's this threat of pushing the pawn with a discovered attack on the king. So that's a disaster. After queen h4 check, in fact, the only good move here is king to e2. And the funny thing about it, I guess, is that this line is playable at all. But Steinitz, the first world champion, used to play this. And he used to say, you know, the king is a strong piece. It's a fighter, and you should use it. The general consensus since then is that the king is a strong piece, yes, but it's better to use it in the end game. It's a little bit too risky to use it in the middle game. So this is the kind of position where the black player is just going to try and take advantage of the exposed king, use that to develop his pieces with tempo, and white is going to get his pieces out. I mean, Steinitz would even play moves like king to d3, using the king to hold on to the center pawns at time. Of course, right now it would be a bit risky with the knight coming in here to b4 and giving a check. But anyway, that was the kind of player he was. I think more sensible in this position would be to develop some pieces for white. It's black's turn at the moment, but let's see. And black can continue undermining the center with the d5. That's probably a good move in a position like this. Or the funny move b6. That actually seems to score well on the chess engine. I guess you can develop your bishop here. Anyway, play would continue from here. You don't get into this line so much anymore. This has gone out of style, as they say. And just going by the computer evaluation, you might think black should really just be winning because he's forced white's king to move. He's got a couple of pieces out, but he doesn't have a whole lot developed if you look at it. He's still got a lot more development to go. And white actually has some space and some center control. So there are, in spite of white's king position, there are some compensating advantages to white. So even though it's slightly favorable to black, it's not like black is winning or anything. And it's actually a playable position if you're interested in the offbeat kind of opening line. Okay, that's the Steinitz Gambit. Let's back up. One last line I wanted to look at in the Vienna game. So it's knight c3. We looked at knight to f6. We looked at knight to c6. There's also bishop to c5. And right here, white can continue with bishop to c4, or he can play the move f4, which is sort of more in keeping with the spirit of the Vienna game and trying to get in that f4. But now d6 is a playable move. This is a transposition into a King's Gambit declined. So if you play the King's Gambit declined with bishop c4 against the move f4, then this is probably a comfortable way for you to play as black. White can try something else here besides immediate f4. Probably knight f3, going after the pawn. There's another top move here. And once again, d6 defending. And this would get into, which sometimes happens if both players aren't playing the main line. We get into the kind of position that you might get from an Italian game where you just have these small centers, pieces developed, the knights are developed to their natural squares. And let's see, it's white's movement in this position. Actually, white can try d4 here if he wants to try and open things up and make it a bit interesting. But he could also just continue with bishop to c4, and we get moves like this. And this would be a very typical kind of position that you might see from a closed Italian game, which is what I was trying to say. That's the kind of position you can transpose into. Okay, that concludes my coverage for the Vienna game. I would say if I were to highlight anything, particularly if you're the black player, it's good to play the main line, and that's what I'd recommend. Go ahead and play the main line with knight f6, and after f4, remember to get in that move d5, and that should keep you in good stead. Although you have to stay on your toes. It's a position that will open up, and you're exposed. But that's what happens. Okay, that concludes my coverage of the Vienna game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned. I'll be talking about the bishop's opening in the next video. See you then.